Welcome to Trinity Radio. You found the channel that loves atheists. You also found the channel that today is showing its love for Elon Musk. Elon was in an interview sometime back, maybe years ago, with Dwight from The Office, as a matter of fact. They had a conversation about prayer, worldview, and spirituality. I think that it's a great opportunity for us to talk about meaning and purpose for mankind. So we're going to jump into that discussion right now and see what we can learn. I'm glad you're here. And if you appreciate what we do on this channel or you like what you see here today, we would love for you to help us out at patreon.com/Trinity Radio, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to extra content and you can help make this show better. Also, I teach at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary at Trinitysem, that's Trinitysem.edu. You can go to school there online in your pajamas at home. Would love for you to check us out today and request more information. Now, let's jump into this conversation with Dwight. I'm just going to call him Dwight. I know his name is like Rainn Wilson, maybe. I don't know. I'm just going to jump into the video today and let's see how it goes.
What do you worship?
Well, I don't really worship anything, but I do devote myself to the advancement of humanity using technology.
Do you pray?
I don't. I didn't even pray when I almost died of malaria.
Wow, that's really not praying.
Yeah, let's stop there for a moment and talk a little bit about what we have seen. So in answering the question of worship, Elon answers the question of what he devotes himself to. And I think that makes sense, a certain amount of sense, because what he's devoting himself to is the advancement of the human race, the advancement of humanity. But in a particular way, I think that talking about what you devote yourself to, if you don't think of yourself as a religious person who worships in the traditional sense, is, well, what do you devote yourself to? Because traditionally, worship has been closely aligned with the concept of sacrifice. What is it that you are sacrificing toward? What is it that you are giving up in favor of this particular virtue or good? Elon thinks that he has something like that. The advancement of the human race through technology. And I think that that's an interesting answer. It's a focused one. But here's the question. How do you know that the way you're advancing humanity is exactly the right way to advance humanity? See, when you talk about, when people who don't believe in an objective purpose or don't think they can know what that objective purpose is yet, or when people are talking about morality in a lot of circumstances, they use value-based terms that only make sense if there really is something like an objective purpose for humankind or meaning for humankind, because they use terms like better or worse or advancement or something like that. Well, what does it mean to advance? It means that you are coming closer to some particular goal. So if you are advancing the human race, you are bringing them closer to a very real goal that you have in mind, to which you are trying to get humanity closer. And in his case, that is, he's going to get us to some goal, and we'll talk more about what that goal seems to be. But we're going to get there through technology. We're going to move out into the stars. We're going to move to other planets. This is what he wants to do, and this is an advancement of humankind. Also, he speaks generically, or generally, I should say. He says that through tech, he wants to make humanity better. So even though the big issue that he always throws out there is this idea that we'll go out to the stars. And so that's what we think of. That's where all the money goes. That's what we see happening. But perhaps he wants to better humanity in other ways. I mean, for example, Elon wants to do things with transportation. He may have done things that I don't even know about that betters humanity on planet Earth. But the idea that we're supposed to go out into the stars, that's the means by which he highlights here that we're going to advance the human race. And we're going to do that with technology. Advance it toward what? Toward what? See, how do you know the way you're advancing the human race is what you should be doing if you don't know what the purpose is or the ultimate goal is? If it's a simulation, for example, as Elon suggests it might be, even in this video, but if it's a simulation, well, then how do you know that going out into the stars to reach your goal, which I'll just go ahead and let the cat out of the bag, the goal that he has seems to be, he said, well, the goal is to get to the stars. Well, not really. He goes deeper than that. The goal is the continued existence of the human race long after our sun destroys all life on Earth or anything else. We need to be out there in the stars so that conscious existence, human conscious existence, can continue And so existence, just continued existence, perhaps he would say flourishing, although that could be subjective. We talk about what exactly it means for a being to flourish, and it could also be about value-based term. But when he's talking about advancement into the stars, it's for the express purpose of surviving death, surviving extinction, so that the human race can go on existing. But if this is a simulation, as you suggest it might be, you don't know that that's the purpose, to continue existing. Perhaps the simulators, whoever they are, some alien race, some higher race, whatever, who's running the simulations, their goal for us might be that we just live a very ascetic situation here on Earth and quietly live our lives and then die. That could be the purpose that they have for us. Who knows what the purpose would be for some simulators? Now, I get that it seems like an obvious or intuitive guess to think, well, at the very least, we keep existing. No, I get that, but you can't say that's what the simulators have in mind if you don't know. Or let's consider the possibility that the Christian God exists. You could do this with any God, but let's consider the Christian God. Okay, if the Christian God exists, then that's not the going into the stars and all of that may be a good thing for other reasons. The thing is not just to have continued existence simplicator. The idea is that we would love the Lord our God and love our neighbors as ourselves. That's it. That's the goal. And of course, that will entail a lot of other things that come after it. But the point I want to make here is if you don't know what the purpose is or what the meaning is, then you don't know that if what you're doing to try and quote unquote advance humankind might actually be a regress to humankind or simply directed in the wrong way if you don't know what the purpose or the meaning is supposed to be. And it could be a number of different things depending on who the simulators are or who God is or whatever. Right. So I think that's some super interesting stuff to think about. But Elon is unwaveringly focused on this goal of advancing humanity, advancing them toward what? Advance, as we say, is a value-based term. But this sounds as though Elon's devotion kind of betrays him. His words kind of betray him. He gives away a little bit that, no, actually, you seem to think you know. You seem to think you know. You are devoted to this notion. You have sacrificed for this notion. It's all you talk about, or at least it's a lot of what you talk about. So it seems like maybe you think you do know what the purpose of mankind is. Conversely, it could be that what he suspects is, I don't have the full answer, but I have enough of the answer that I believe functioning this way will get me the fuller answer. And in fact, he does say something like that. We'll go on to that in just a few moments. Now, I want you to notice something here is this issue of prayer. Do you pray? No, not even when I was dying of malaria. Now, on the one hand, I don't want to psychologize him, but I'm just telling you what I see in front of me. Elon seems very humble about his knowledge of what the purpose or meaning of life is, or what's going on worldview-wise, or the mysteries of the universe. You know, there's a level of humility there, but when it comes to this prayer, it seems like just absolute confidence that I don't need to bother myself with that. Well, what happens to the humility here? I mean, I get it that there are people who have terminal illnesses, and there are people who want to point out that this idea that there are no atheists in the foxholes. Well, no, maybe there are people who are dying sometimes do hold fast to their atheism even into death and all of that sort of thing. And I get that. But you would think that if you're a disinterested, like if you really are like Elon presented himself, let's say on his appearance on the Babylon Bee, for example, you would expect him to be a little more open. Okay, I'm kind of in a Pascal's wager sort of way. I'm going to pray. I mean, it doesn't really cost me anything. I'll pray. But it seems like it takes a principled position to say, nope, I'm not going to pray, not even in the face of death. But I just want you to notice that on the one hand, Elon presents himself as though he's really humble and really open and really embracing the mystery. But then on the other hand, it's like, nah, I'm not going to pray. And I just find that odd. I mean, it speaks to his confidence level or the lack of confidence he has in prayer. But it just seems striking. It seems like there might be something else motivating that. I would really like to hear more of his thoughts on that issue. But unfortunately, we didn't get it, so we'll move on.
So you put your money where your bug spray was.
Yeah.
Do you have a spiritual life?
Well, it sort of depends on what spiritual means.
So what do you think spiritual means?
And there's certainly things that we don't understand about the universe. But I'm less convinced that there's, say, some super consciousness watching over our every movement and kind of evaluating it against some criteria, and deciding whether we're going to go to one place or another when we die. I think that's unlikely.
Right. I think that's very unlikely, too.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is where the real fun begins. And as we're about to tackle this question of who created the superconsciousness, but I just thought we'd break for a minute just to kind of give yourself a rest and do a little sing-along with Elon and Dwight. So hope you enjoy this. If you don't want to listen to this, just skip ahead a couple of minutes and you'll be good. See you on the flip side.
Superconsciousness. What do you worship? What gives you all? What blows your mind? Do you pray? Isn't that an arrogant statement to say, can I have a with all the trillions of stars you can find in the galaxy?
If there is some superconsciousness,
Big.
where did the superconsciousness come from? If there is some superconsciousness,
The causal.
where did the superconsciousness come from? If there is some superconsciousness,
Big.
where did the superconsciousness come from?
You put your money where your bug spray was.
Yeah.
This question, who created God, or all right, what is God's cause? I've heard so many college sophomores ask this question as though this is the sort of knockdown argument that destroys theism. And it's just based on a misunderstanding. Knockdown argument. It's just based on a misunderstanding. It's just based on a misunderstanding. It's just based on a misunderstanding. Knockdown argument. So the question is really, what is the cause of the first uncaused cause? Which is sort of asking about the name of the married bachelor's wife. It just is meaningless.
If there is some superconsciousness,
Big.
where did the superconsciousness come from? If there is some superconsciousness,
The causal.
where did the superconsciousness come from? If there is some superconsciousness,
Big.
where did the superconsciousness come from?
You put your money where your bug spray was.
Yeah.
Can I have with all the trillions of stars?
Knockdown argument.
Let's find out what this knockdown argument
Knockdown argument.
really is.
I mean, and it does beg the question: if there is some superconsciousness, where did the superconsciousness come from? So I think the most likely explanation is that complexity evolved from simplicity. That the simple elements over time combined to become more complex and arrived at what we are.
What blows your mind?
Okay. Yeah. So let's notice here what we've got. All right. Do you have a spiritual life? That was the question. Now, he interprets this question rather than what I think Dwight, I'm just going to call him Dwight, probably wants, which is Dwight really just wants to find out, do you have spiritual practices, I think? Are you spiritual in the way that Katy Perry or Justin Timberlake are? Katy Perry, who says, oh, I'm not a Christian, I'm not part of any particular religion, I'm just spiritual. Is that what you are? And if so, what do you mean by that? Elon just kind of takes it in a different direction. And here's what he basically says. I don't believe in a super consciousness evaluating where we go when we die, where did it come from, but there's mystery in the universe and stuff. Okay, but I don't believe there's a super consciousness, because where would the super consciousness come from? In other words, where would God have come from? I think the better explanation is evolution and complexity coming from less complex stuff, and he seems to have created this sort of binary and bifurcated thinking where on the one hand, everything that your Sunday school teacher told you about how it works and how God made the animals and everything that AIG says is true. Or on the other hand, it could be that a hard naturalism is the case or something. And there's just really not much in between, when that is not how any of the, or very few of the people interested in philosophy of religion and talking about these things or doing apologetics online who are getting a lot of success. There are some people like that who are Christians, but it's very few. I mean, it's in terms of what's out there that you would probably be interested in. There are plenty of people who don't think that you have this bifurcated, extreme difference in options. We just think that God made everything. Well, how did he make it? Well, that's interesting. We have to look at genre and what the Bible's talking about. We look at science and see what we think happened in the world, and we try to figure out what does the Bible say as our authority, but then looking at the world around us, what makes the best sense? Well, we do all of that sort of thing, but it's I don't understand this binary thinking. It's very interesting to me. So that's I guess that's all I want to say about that. Let's just keep trucking here.
What gives you awe?
Well, I think the nature of the universe,
nature,
and just
I don't really know why I included this clip in here, because it's pretty much the same thing you'll get from Neil deGrasse Tyson or anyone who's a atheistic or agnostic popularizer of science. Is they're all going to say, well, the wonder of the universe amazes me. Well, yeah, of course, it amazes all of us. Although I do think there's something interesting about the notion that if I'm Elon, I might be amazed that our universe is the high def nature of it. I mean, because it's simulation, right? Somebody put this whole thing together as a simulation. So I'm looking around and I'm just thinking, man, we're impressed with 4K and we used to be impressed with 1080p. Look at this, man. These people did an incredible job with this virtual reality simulation that I'm experiencing sorts. Just bravo, guys, done. Is that the amazement that you're having? Is that what's wondrous about it? Or if you think the part of you that thinks, well, no, I'm not sure there is a God, or there is no super consciousness. I mean, because look, this is what maybe you've never thought about this, but this is what I think about when I think of Elon or anyone talking about, well, you don't need God. Maybe this is a simulation. There's a 1 in a billion chance that it's not a simulation. So you're probably in a simulation. Okay. You think that means we don't have to talk about the God question? Take something like a contingency argument or the Kalam cosmological argument. All right, you think that we don't need theism because we could still have a designer of sorts, and it just be what's above the simulation, one level above that, whoever's running the simulation. Okay, but they exist in some sort of reality, right? Don't they? And then we would still have to ask the same questions that come up in a contingency argument, regardless of what sort of a universe that they're in, if it's a universe of space and time and objects, to where they could create a simulation. Well, then we'd still have to ask the same question in their simulation, in their reality. What if that reality turns out to also be a simulation? Like they're running our simulation, but they're also a simulation being run with a higher up simulation. Okay, well now you can't have an infinite regress of simulators and worlds that the simulators exist in. So you still terminate, and the things that these arguments are meant to get you at the end of the day are still going to be the same things that they meant to get you when we only thought there was one. So that's an interesting thing that I think needs to be said, because it does the simulation say, oh, that seems like an interesting sort of public intellectual way of having something provocative in your worldview, and turning heads, but also kind of doing away with the whole concept of God by taking the conversation somewhere you never expected. And it seems kind of enlightened, except that you have the same exact problems. So not really. But in any case, that's something that I like to talk about, or I've wanted to say about this for quite a while. But in addition to, if you've got simulators advancing the human race, depends on what they intend for the human race. And you might say, well, why is that? Well, partly because that's just how things work. You can go back and read existential atheist writers like Jean-Paul Sartre, and you'll find here that the notion, he will describe the notion that, okay, we can look at things and we can infer function because we know what the purpose was, right? And so when you look at a shovel, let's say, the shovel has a purpose, and you have to look to the designer of that shovel to tell you what that purpose is. Or it might be obvious enough what the purpose is based on where we've seen handles used before and things that look more or less shovel-like. But when it comes to humanity or whatever, we would need the creator to tell us what the purpose is to really know with specificity what the purpose is. And the creator of the shovel gets to decide the purpose of the shovel, and the creator of a hammer gets to decide the purpose of a hammer. And so the creator has rights to that sort of prescription in a way that the shovel itself never could. If the shovel could think, it might decide a purpose for itself, but it wouldn't be the objective purpose of itself. Its creator gives it that purpose. So you could just decide on your own purpose. And that's what many atheists do. Well, I don't really have any ultimate purpose, but I like music, so that's my purpose. Or I like to create art, or I like to do philosophy or mathematics. So I create those purposes for myself. Well, that's fine. In the same way you can create a morality that you live by. And but that doesn't mean that anybody else should take seriously your purpose or think that your purpose actually does benefit you or anybody else. Maybe it does, depending on what that purpose does. Things I mentioned might benefit. But if you don't know why you were created, you can't really know what the point of your creation is. You can usurp it. You can make up your own. But as we see here with questions like this being posed in an arena where there isn't a religious, I don't think that Dwight, he says he doesn't think it's likely either, but they're still asking these questions. Well, why? Because they are the big questions of life. These are questions that people long for answers to. And I hope that is helpful in some way. I'm not sure where we got with that, but do you have a spiritual life? He talks about what he thinks is likely when it comes to the nature of reality, and I'm perfectly happy with that discussion as well. But just to point out that that the answers that he has given, I don't think work or are misguided, because they're either they're looking at extremes like we see here, or they just don't get us to an answer. And what blows your mind, the nature of the universe. Another thing I wanted to say about this nature of the universe, like I said, everybody gives that answer. But here's the thing. If I believed, he believes the simulation, but if I didn't believe there was a creator or a simulator, if I was just an atheist out here, and an atheist in the hard sense, right? The atheist that says, I believe that no God exists, right? I believe that there is no God. Not just I don't believe that there is a God, but I believe there is no God. Okay, then I would also be in awe of the universe. I think apologists who say the other are wrong about this. If you knew that there was no God, right, would you stand in awe of the universe? Now, the degree to which you stand in awe of the universe and why you stand in awe of it is I think bolstered by the fact that you and I, for reasons, think that there is a creator who intended it. But if you don't think so, if you could put yourself in the mind for just a moment of a Richard Dawkins or somebody like that, or Elon, who say these sorts of things, and don't believe there's a God, or believe that there isn't a God, perhaps. Well, the thing that I just think is, okay, now, yes, this is actually pretty darn amazing that this happened without any involvement, like no intelligence whatsoever. And it's as amazing as this. I'm not like the apologists say, I don't see why they marvel. No, I see why they marvel. And this is where, again, I don't think that this is the incorrect use of faith. I think this notion. And I think that the authors of this book, Turek and Geisler, knew that, and were just playing on the colloquial use that atheists sometimes bring out and say, well, this is what people mean by faith. If that's the way you want to use it, then fine. But this idea that faith is based on, like this notion that faith is believing what you know ain't so, or faith is based on no evidence or whatever. I don't buy those descriptions of faith. But if that's what's intended when they say, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, I don't have enough faith to be that kind of atheist. And I mean it exactly like I mean it. To stand looking at creation and stand in awe. Yeah, it would take some darn awe, more than I can muster, because it stretches my credulity to really think that much. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, right? So yeah, if I really believe there was no God and I'm looking at this creation, I'm blown away. The problem is, in my case, it would turn me right back to a theist again. Right. Okay. Let's see what else we got here. Let's skip ahead a little bit in this to about 2 minutes and 4 seconds, and we're going to hear a few more things here.
I had this like existential crisis when I was a kid, and tried to figure out what's it all about. And none of the books I read seemed to actually have a good answer. You know, so I read all the religious texts, and I read a bunch of philosophy books, and they're all quite depressing. Actually, when I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I thought, okay, this is a pretty good one.
Yeah, it is a pretty good one. Interestingly, well, let's hear what he has to say here first.
You know, just to sort of try to gain greater enlightenment over time, that seems like a good goal. Because we don't really know what the meaning of life is, or even really what the right questions are to ask. But if we can improve our understanding of the universe, then eventually we can figure out what the right question to ask is. You know, if it's not meaning of life, it's something. You know. Yeah. The question is harder than the answer, and if you can properly phrase the question, then the answer is the easy part. And so, if to the degree that we can better understand the universe, then we better know what questions to ask, and then whatever the question is that most approximates what's the meaning of life, you know, that's the question we could ultimately get closer to understanding.
Okay, and similar to that, let's skip to another portion of the video and get something on the same vein so that we can make our comments together. Here we go.
It is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate.
If you consider the major elements on the scale of evolution as being the advent of single-celled life, multicellular life, differentiation of plants and animals, life going from the oceans to land, mammals and consciousness, those are probably the big ones. But I think on that scale would also fit life becoming multiplanetary for the first time. You know, I think it's perhaps at least as important as life going from the oceans to land. And it would, I think, preserve the light of consciousness. You know, the consciousness, the probability of consciousness existing for a long time would be much greater if we were on two planets. If something catastrophic were to happen to Earth, then it would, you know, life would still exist on another planet. I mean,
let's see here. All right, so we're done. All right, so we're done with that now. So some things I want to say about this. First of all, he says, I read all the religious texts. No, you didn't. And I read a bunch of philosophy books. Okay, I believe that. And they were all quite depressing. Now, here's the problem. If you read all of the philosophy book, or if you read a bunch of philosophy books, then and you were thinking about this question of God's existence, which is, I mean, first of all, that's going to come up in philosophy quite a bit, especially if you're reading classical works of philosophy as well as stuff that's being written now in the philosophy of religion, for example. But if you read all of those, you sure should have gotten an answer to that question of who created the superconsciousness or who made God. You should have gotten some sort of a reaction to that answer if you spent very long at all studying philosophy, because that's one of the questions that gets answered when you start looking at the nature of God's existence in almost any book on the topic. That's going to come up. Unfortunately, it's not coming up in a way that is positive to the case against God's existence. Here is famous atheist philosopher Michael Roos talking about Richard Dawkins' posing of that question as a serious problem.
I want to talk to you about a particular scientist who does some philosophy of science in his book, and I have heard you say there are few things more simple than Richard Dawkins' God delusion.
Yeah, no, as I said, makes me ashamed to be an atheist, I think was the phrase I used.
What do you mean by that? In what way is it simple or simplistic?
Well, I think it's not simple, it's simplistic. I mean, there's nothing wrong with KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I mean, one of the virtues of science is simplicity. The trouble with Dawkins, I mean, you know, maybe this is envy. The guy sold 3 million copies of the book. I wish, you know, I wish I'd sold 3 million copies of one of my books. I mean, the trouble is, he just doesn't take the things that he's talking about seriously. Now, okay, Philosophy on 100 undergraduate response, what caused God? We've all done it. We've all been there. And, it's a good question, but, it's not the end of the argument. Dawkins then triumphantly says, there you are, bad argument, let's move on. You know, and I know, that Christians, St. Augustine, certainly St. Thomas, spent a hell of a lot of, they knew this.
Now, he says that he enjoyed reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I totally understand that. It is a classic, modern classic book, and the movie's all right, too. And in the book or the movie, you'll find out that the answer to the question, the question of the universe or the meaning of life or purpose or whatever, the answer to the question is 42. And everybody's a bit crestfallen by this because what you learned then is that's the answer, but you don't know the right question to ask. If you knew the right question to ask, this would all make sense. 42 would blow your mind, but you don't know the right questions to ask. And Elon, having been impacted by that sort of thinking, it is interesting to me that, like, what philosophy books did you read? I really want to know that. But he's reading this philosophy, he's reading The Hitchhiker's Guide, and he decides, yes, we got to figure out what the right question is. And so it seems that the more we can populate the cosmos with conscious agents, the closer we will get to finding out that right question. But really the venue through which, he doesn't say it exactly right like that. He seems to describe scientific investigation as the means by which we will ultimately ascertain the question that needs to be asked. The problem is, it's not anything against science. It's just that's a misunderstanding of what science does. This is another thing that would have been addressed in many of the philosophy books. Introductory level philosophy books is stuff related to epistemology and realms of knowledge and different areas of investigation and all those kind of things. Especially if you go into looking at questions related to the nature of God and all of those kind of things. Science just answers the questions of observation and what something is and how things work. But these questions about what is the purpose of humanity? Why is the universe here? Like what is the intention? And all those kind of things. They may imply design. Those questions, the way I'm stating some of them, may imply a designer. They don't have to, but you can ask those philosophical questions, but they are philosophical questions. They are not necessarily and strictly scientific questions. So that would be to look about them in the wrong place. And when you, and of course we see the problems that result from that. You end up making simple mistakes of philosophy because you thought that science was more important. So it makes me wonder what books of religion or what you read. I think he said he read all the great books, all the great religious texts. But which ones? Which ones did you read? You didn't read all of them. Which ones did you read? And then which books of philosophy did you read? You said you read a bunch, because it would surprise me that you would give these sorts of answers if you did. So in any case, there's that. But to the question of who created the super, or what caused the super cause, or what created the super consciousness, or whatever, however, who made God? That question. Well, first of all, one thing that should be mentioned is we live in a world of contingent things. The things that exist, like this cell phone or this video game controller from Stadia or this mouse from Apple, these things could have failed to exist. And even if you're a determinist and you think, no, they weren't going to fail to exist, they're contingent in a very obvious second sense, and that is that they depended on other things for their existence, and they depend on things for their continued existence. And so the things in this world are contingent, and all the things of this world put together make up one big contingent fact. And so the thing that stands, you can't have an infinite chain of contingent things. But even if you think you could, we still have to ask why this chain of contingent things instead of some other chain of contingent things. Well, these things ultimately have to terminate somewhere, and that is the necessary foundation of all reality. And even many atheist philosophers believe there is such a thing. They just argue about what it is, necessary foundation, or what it is that's necessary. But the notion that you would have a necessary foundation of all reality would mean that if God does exist as the necessary foundation for all reality, as the contingency argument reasons, then the question of who made God becomes meaningless because he's necessary. He's not contingent. And if you go about it with, say, something like Craig's Kalam cosmological argument, then you recognize that this God, depending on how you argue it in the analysis of this cause, then what you come to is a spaceless, timeless, non-material, sufficiently powerful something. Well, things that are timeless, if this God exists and it's timeless, then timeless things don't need causes. In this sense, the super cause doesn't need a cause, or the super creator or the super consciousness doesn't need something to cause the super consciousness because it doesn't exist in time. The only things that need, beginning, something having a beginning is a temporal or time-based term. And so if something exists timelessly, it's just nonsense to talk about it having a beginning. But time is a part of the physical universe. So if the physical universe is something that came to be, well, then whatever caused it to come to be is just going to be something that has no beginning because it's timeless, right? So these are questions that I think the theistic arguments can answer. But if we don't know what the meaning of life is, we don't know what the right question to ask is. But if we can improve our understanding, Elon thinks, of the universe, then eventually we can figure out what the right question is. I don't think so. So his big concerns that we've seen here are the narrative via God, that everything was created like your Sunday school teacher told you, and it's a special act of creation, and everything that AIG says is true. That or hard naturalism, that is out of the water. So he shouldn't remain agnostic or atheist or whatever he is based on those things. The idea that it's that who made God, this where did the superconsciousness come from, is a misunderstanding of metaphysics as we talk about these things. So I don't think that should stand in his way, and neither do atheist philosophers like Michael Ruse, who we saw. I think the way he is actually going about trying to find the solution is whether it's good for humanity or not, it will be, if it is, then praise God for that, but it will be in spite of his knowing what the purpose or his way of searching for the purpose and meaning of life is, which is just to put humans out there in the cosmos and keep studying, and ultimately science will give us an answer. No, it won't. Not an answer to this. It may give you an answer, but it won't be an answer to the right question. And isn't that what this is all about, according to Elon anyway? Listen, my greatest desire is that Elon and Dwight come to faith in Christ. I'm praying that will happen one day. There are several people who are really well known who are on the brink of that, and I believe God's doing something special. If you don't know, listen, we've talked mostly about God's existence and science and philosophy here today, but I want to tell you that I believe that there's good reason to believe that God exists, and good historical reason to believe God raised Jesus from the dead. I believe there's good reason on the basis of the resurrection of Jesus to believe that the New Testament of the Bible and the Old Testament of the Bible are authoritative, and that you should listen to what God has to say through those texts. And Jesus had a lot to say about how to live your life and about what's going to happen in the end. And so ultimately, Jesus died to pay the price for your sin, so that you wouldn't have to be separated from him. You wouldn't have to go to any place like hell. You wouldn't have to die. The reality is not die in the sense of the second death, but ultimately you could flourish. And perhaps you will flourish in the new heaven and the new earth one day as a believer. Perhaps we will flourish in precisely the way Elon thinks, by going out to the stars, traveling the stars. Oh, that sounds silly. Well, why does it sound silly? We're doing that right now. Why would we think that the God who is very much on his throne right now, while we're doing that right now, won't continue to allow us to do that in the hereafter? I see no reason to think he won't. And perhaps we'll achieve far more than Elon ever could have imagined. And listen, that God who created all of us and created Elon and created this cosmos, that God, I believe, sent his son to die on the cross for your sin, so that you could have a relationship with him and be a part of that kingdom. And you do that by placing your trust in Jesus. You trust that God will do for you in the future what he says he will do, based on what we have good evidence and good reason to believe he's done in the past. God loves you. Jesus died to take your place, to pay for your sin, so you wouldn't have to pay for it. He did that for all of humanity by becoming a man. You say, well, I don't know how to respond to that. Well, you can reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about this. But I'll tell you, there's no magic phrase. You just need to tell the Lord that you know you're a sinner, that you believe Jesus died for you. Romans chapter 10, verse 9 says, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. I think it's appropriate for you to pray a prayer and tell the Lord that you want to do that and you believe those things, that you want to live for him. And then reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about how to find a place to plug into the kingdom in your daily life wherever you live on planet Earth. Thanks for being here today, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time on Trinity Radio.